Welcome back. I'm MCNEW, and this is Duty, Grit, and Grinds. Got Sgt Watson back in the studio. He and I were having a conversation earlier. It was off camera. He was talking about his day-to-day work. He was specifically talking about the Therapeutic Court, which is a program run by his staff. It's an alternative to the criminal justice system that links individuals up with options for substance use disorder, mental health issues, things like that. The hope is that it keeps the jail and those resources available for more serious offenders, eliminates or reduces the need for repeat calls for service for individuals that our patrol officers are responding to, and better serves the community by better serving the individuals involved. And so we were in a discussion. It was not scripted. There was no outline. It just was happening in real time. So I hit record. And so we're going to cut to a soft opening where Sgt Watson and I discuss the Therapeutic Court, and that rolls into his day-to-day job as the sergeant of the Behavioral Health Unit. That's a program that's becoming more popular nationwide, statewide here in the state of Washington. He manages a team of crisis responders. These are non-commissioned individuals with different backgrounds in mental health response, crisis response, and community outreach. He works day to day with these individuals. They are first responders, boots on the ground that respond to 911 calls related to acute crisis, disorderly subjects, welfare checks, things like that. The overarching mission of the unit is to reduce calls for service for the average patrol officer so that they are available to respond to emergencies, because we, like departments across the country, we have limited staff and limited resources, and this team helps keep police officers available for emergencies. And so I'm going to roll into that cold opening, and you can join the conversation with Sgt Watson about therapeutic courts and the Behavioral Health Unit.
My propensity to equip people to do their job compared to telling people, here's how I want your job done. Mm-hmm. And, there's it's not micromanaging. I don't want to look at it as micromanaging, but just like management in a broad term compared to leadership in a broader term. Mm-hmm. And the failing that can happen on either one. So if you manage people, you may not allow them to aspire to higher things. Mm-hmm. Whereas you are a leader, you may aspire to greater things that maybe couldn't have happened if you were managing. But also there is risk of letting the people do. And as I was just contemplating this therapeutic court going, I've got an employee that has almost by themselves created this program with other people in the criminal justice system. So it's not just them, with minimal oversight. It was like, here's the idea from the head of the administration, make this happen. And they're like, yeah, we're just going to make that happen. And then, so I was thinking about as the supervisor, things could go wrong, and I need to help equip the employee to navigate that so things don't go wrong. They have a 30,000 foot view of it. And then I thought, I also have a boss that should be aware of things should things go awry.
I suppose it's a cop-out to say that program was started by someone else and they are still half involved in it. It still ultimately is my division, my program, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I love it. That's why I love it with you supervise the people who supervise this program.
Yeah.
And which, going into your leadership style, which is similar to my leadership style, it's like, yeah, this is getting done.
No news is good news.
No news is good news.
Well, I guess then it's worth explaining, where does the program sit now? What does the therapeutic court program do?
And that's the beauty of people like me who like change. It is constantly evolving. We have upwards of 20 people, just shy of 20 people was the maximum that we had enrolled. And people come and go from that program because of the nature of addiction. You have people, it's therapeutic by name, so it's also drug and mental health components tied together. And that's rough for people to battle both their mental health and their substance abuse at the same time. So the therapeutic court works on getting the people off drugs first, because that's easiest to treat. Stop doing drugs. In theory, right? It's not simple. It's not easy for someone to do, but taking that out of the equation is a lot easier than trying to solve some of the mental health issues. With that, where we're at now is we have people, roughly about 15 that are in various stages. There's 3 stages of the program of, I can't remember what those stages are now.
Maybe we should back the therapeutic truck up a minute.
Back that truck up.
To give some groundwork. So let's back all the way up. So your current assignment is what?
My current assignment, I am the sergeant in charge of the behavioral health unit. And a unit has 5 crisis responders, which are folks with mental health type training, experience, education, background, and then 1 outreach coordinator.
Not commissioned law enforcement officers.
Right, all civilian staff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and just what's their mission or function?
Their function is to assist the patrol officer out there that are getting calls for service that regard people that are in a mental health crisis, not necessarily a criminal act. No, it may be a criminal act. They may be disorderly. Maybe they're yelling out in public. But the core of it is that they are having a mental health issue. Mm-hmm. So one of 2 things happens. A call for service comes in, and from there, decision tree happens. Is an officer going to go there because maybe there's some safety component to it? Or if there's no safety issue, then the crisis responders can respond to that scene where the person is in crisis. Could be their home, could be out in the street. Another thing that can happen is proactively the crisis responders can be out and about, and they have relationship with many of the frequent customers out in the public and can come across them and assess if their baseline stable for the day, or maybe they've declined, and work on proactively getting ahead of it before a call for service comes in. So the mission is to support the law enforcement officers with these issues that the citizens want handled, which are people in mental health crisis.
So certainly since the beginning of my career, and probably also since the beginning of your career, these calls for service they've been coming in forever. And because police officers are the people on the street by default over the last many decades, the call for service for this person who's having a mental health crisis comes into the 911 center, because that's who people call. And by default, the police are who are on the street, and they respond. And so we over the decades have become the de facto response to mental illness, which hasn't always gone well, but it has resulted in police officers, in my opinion, being some of the most highly trained individuals to deal with acute mental illness crisis. It doesn't mean we fully understand it. It just means we've developed tools for de-escalation, for communication and problem solving at an acute level on the street. But it doesn't always go well, and it doesn't get to the root of the problem. And so recently, our department develops in 2020 or 2021, I think is when it started, through the current chief, develops a program for a co-responder model that was gaining some popularity, although what we did was pretty cutting edge statewide, maybe nationwide, in trying to not just have police officers respond to the acute problem, but get ahead of problems by connecting folks with resources and doing steps beyond and before the problem starts, so that we can avoid future problems. And at the core of it, the point is to relieve the burden on the individual patrol officers so that they're available to handle more pressing calls for service, and also for the individual in crisis to help stop the cycle of repeated crisis. And the end result for the police agency organizationally is we have less calls for this individual, and the community sees them less malfunctioning in the street, and then they're getting the care. So it's like It's a more tailored response, seems to make more sense, and we've had great success. So the program starts in August, I think, of 2021, and it looked different than it does now. At the time, as it was a pilot program, we contracted services, and we had some of the same individuals we have as crisis responders now, and its trajectory has grown to encompass our homeless outreach and some different positions, a community outreach coordinator and some other things. So the latest change in that program is January of this year, 24. It had peaked to where it was operating as the crisis responders and the behavioral health unit are highly successful, high functioning, but it had sort of peaked what it could do without a police officer attached to the unit or direct supervision, meaning your job as police sergeant. So I think that lays the groundwork for you to just kind of explain the co-responder model with the addition of the community outreach, homeless outreach. How's all that connected to mental illness? And like, what's a normal day look like for you, the community outreach coordinator, and the crisis responders?
Yeah, we started discussing like what the mission is, and that's how it gets accomplished is where the amazing things happen and where the lives are changed. So my day, I start out every morning with my outreach coordinator. Sometimes before 6 in the morning, it's dark out, and we go and hit the streets looking for places where people that are unsheltered may be hunkered down at. We had found that the best way to have these intersections and interactions is to find people when they are asleep instead of during the middle of the day wandering about. People are easy to find when they're stationary. So we go and meet people and figure out what their needs may be. Why are you sleeping under the stars right now? Why are you trespassing on somebody's property and set up a tent or whatever where it shouldn't be set up at? So as the outreach coordinator, we go through and we educate people on what the laws are, what the parameters are. We educate them on what resources are available. And we work next towards educating them on how they can best utilize those resources, how they can get engaged. And it's hard to tell somebody that is just struggling to survive on the street, hey, make this appointment at 2 p.m. tomorrow. And if you can't make it, make sure you call, put this in your calendar. And as I'm saying, it's just kind of ridiculous to ask somebody who is focusing on their next meal. If I'm going to eat today and we're trying to set up schedule an appointment down the road, a day or two, some people are like, oh, in 3 weeks, can you meet me at the Social Security office? That meeting's not going to happen. So the outreach coordinator assesses what this person's needs are and what the barrier is for their success. Whatever their success they want it to be. Some people want to get back into housing. They want to get a job, or they want to get to family that is in a different part of the United States. So outreach coordinator gathers information, triages the information, and makes assessments of, is there something that we can do to help? Or is there somebody out there that they know, an organization out there to help? They'll take the person's information and either contact an agency that can warm hand off to them. Here is John, here are his issues, and I know you solve those issues for people, here you go. Or if we don't have anything that exists for that person's needs right there, it could be a later referral for our behavioral health unit, the crisis responders, to follow up with. All the people in my division, all the civilians, are well knowledge in resources within our region, not just within our city, but in the greater Southwest Washington West Coast area. And they're always looking to make more connections because there's people with unique needs that come up that have never heard of this before, and this is their barrier. And it's about a short-term case management to get them to the best agency that can help, either government or an NGO that can help them make their next best step so they're not on the streets anymore.
You said resources, and I know what you mean by that, but it occurs to me not everyone might. So rattle off like 5 resources, just the last 5 resources someone has needed.
Resources, a huge one where there's gaps is drug treatment, people that have co-occurring drug and mental health issues, they find it difficult to navigate a way into treatment for them because they will be too acute for the drug and alcohol treatment, or they need to have they're too drug acute for their mental health problems. So it kind of falls in a gap. So that's one. There are people that need just assistance with housing, that they need a place to have a springboard from where they can have a roof over their head for a bit. There are people that need help with getting documents. They've since have lost their ID. They don't have their Social Security card. They haven't been connected to those resources, Social Security or Medicare, things with that we kind of take for granted. Those are in the workforce. Maybe you got health insurance and you got a paycheck coming in. You don't think about those things that cashing a check is difficult when you don't have ID. So those are a handful of things that people need. First barrier or first hurdle to get over to get on a path.
So you mentioned drug treatment. So I think I know the answer to this, but say I have a drug addiction problem and I've decided today's the day. Is it easy to just walk right into drug treatment?
A person can get into drug treatment. Not every day does that happen, but we've had success within 24 hours of getting people into treatment.
And this is through the building relationships and the connections that your unit has made.
Correct. And it's not just in our region. We have connections all over throughout our state. We've got people on buses and trains to get to their location where the treatment is at. But
just out of curiosity, because it gets asked all the time, are we in the business of putting people on a bus just to ship them into another jurisdiction to make them someone else's problem?
Oh, absolutely not. No.
Why would we put someone on a bus?
We would put somebody on the bus if they can confirm that they have a resource network where they're going to. And that's the only reason why we would do that. And it has to be confirmed that they have a network of resources, being family, friends, something that's already existing. Maybe they have a job waiting for them in Tallahassee, making it up, but it could be somewhere. No, but no, we don't just put people on a bus and put a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in their pocket and say, good luck whenever you get to wherever you're going.
Yeah, tell the cops in San Francisco we said hello.
Right.
Not doing that.
Not doing that.
So let's back up a little bit further. So we don't have a unique situation where we work. We have what's sort of become a common situation in certain regions, certainly. So on the West Coast, let's go back, say, to 2013, 2014. We see a huge spike in our homeless population. And just again, to solidify the connection, the homeless connection to mental illness is important because often we see homelessness, mental health issues, and substance use all as co-occurring problems. And so when we mentioned we saw a huge influx in homeless residents, if you will, in our community, that's important because they bring co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders, right or wrong?
Not every person who is out on the streets, are they a substance abuser or have mental health problems? That's not everybody.
Right, of course.
But the majority are. Mm-hmm. Vast majority are having some problem with one or both. And that's where our unit comes into address. It's easy. We do come across people that they're not using drugs. They have had a circumstance happen that they're looking to get back up on the horse, if you will, and get back to work. And those problems are usually solved within 2 days.
Got it. So around I get the days wrong, but 2013 through 2015, somewhere right in there, a neighboring jurisdiction, a well-meaning nonprofit opens up a homeless shelter, a low or no barrier homeless shelter. And it could have been a coincidence. It could have been directly related. I don't have the science on it, but overnight, our community saw a massive increase, documented increase in the homeless count in our community.
Yeah.
So we see that happen, and then that jurisdiction right off the get-go is dealing with numerous calls for service at the shelter. It's a big political nightmare for that community, our sister city across the river. And so you were working during all that? You want
Yeah,
to
yeah. I was
talk
on-
about what things were like during that situation they were dealing with, if we had any fallout from that.
Yeah, I was on patrol then from about 2012 through 2017 when that was had spun up. And you say it was our sister city. It was like the shelter is about 4 blocks from our city limits.
Right.
So it's right on our back door.
Right.
And us being the bigger city, we have more resources for people to utilize. You would see a steady stream of people on our streets now as well that were choosing not to utilize the shelter that was available across the way for a myriad of reasons. Sometimes there was just like, I don't like the people there. There's too many rules. There are rules, and that's a barrier for some people to have a rule. And so we got people now that were choosing not to use a shelter because of these reasons. And so that was the clientele that we were getting.
And contrary to like what the naysayers would believe, because it looks lawless, or rather, that is to say, that situation looked completely lawless. They did have rules. They're just it's a low barrier shelter, and they're difficult to enforce. So we see an influx during this same time period, and eventually that city closes the shelter. And so we have this spike in population, some of which are living at this low or no barrier shelter, some of which have spilled out onto the streets, but one way or the other, that closes. And then we see a huge spike in our public spaces because we're the city with the most resources. We have the hospital. We just have the most resources. And so we see a spike in the places that are lawful to assemble, like city parks, city spaces,
Undeveloped
medians,
commercial areas.
right. As trespassers as well on private property. So we just see these encampments popping up all over. Hundreds of people.
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people.
So that starts to affect the community we work in. And so we start to hear public outcry about these encampments and these individuals just taking over public spaces. The first sort of big one I remember on a public space, because there were many on private property, like you mentioned. Actually, let's back up. So the first thing we started to get was reports of trespassing, right? On private property, camps set up on undeveloped commercial property. So talk a little bit about how that was addressed. And now we're right in 2016, 2017, right in that window of time.
Yeah, right about then we had a couple big areas, like dozens upon dozens of acres of undeveloped commercial land that had been untouched, overrun with weeds, brambles, and it was a great spot for people to burrow into and create their own forts.
Yeah, right.
Camps, if you will, beyond just putting up a tent. Like if you're thinking of a campsite of pitching a tent, you're not thinking of what we were seeing. We're seeing that people had plywood structures, or just debris fields of garbage. It looked like little mini garbage dumps that they would just build upon each other, and were laying on heaps of garbage on these undeveloped spaces.
And everything from construction material, plywood, pallets, cars, boats. It was really like Hook, the movie Hook, the Lost Boys camp. Remember the one in the trees?
Yeah.
Some of them are really elaborate and really well done, and really tunnels, several stories.
Structures.
Yeah. So super elaborate because it was secluded, couldn't be seen from the road, so we weren't getting calls from the public. The landowner's disconnected from the property. He or she's not, or maybe it's a conglomerate. They are not making reports, and so it's out of sight, out of mind to the community, but it grows. And then a couple of things happen. Ultimately, the property would sell for commercial development, but we had, I don't know what you call it, but a cleanup effort in that window of time where folks were told they had to go.
Yeah, property owners started getting notified
Right.
of the complaints.
For nuisance abatement.
The nuisance, right. The city becomes aware of problems. However, we became aware of them, but the city took a multifaceted approach of, we'll use nuisance abatement, which are not the police laws, but your building codes, and these areas were not coded for such activities. And some of the landowners were caught blindsided by it. I have this chunk of land that I've had for eons, I've never had to worry about, and then they go down. You could see their faces be shocked when they would show up. Like, they can't believe what is happening. The laws became murky for police enforcement of, have you allowed somebody to camp here? Is this trespassing? Where are the lot lines at? Because we're talking about divided commercial lots. So a lot of work had to go into making sure that we protected the rights of all. And once the police had all the facts straight of where these lines were at and who the owners were, nuisance abatement letters sent out. We now have owners on board that, yes, I want this problem solved. We helped solve problems by going in and educating the people that they are in fact trespassing, encouraging them to leave the property and find resource that could get them down the path. This is before we had a behavioral health unit to help with these resources.
Right. But right now it's just patrol officers.
This is patrol officers and just
different cop each time. Yeah.
And we tend to lead with more compassion, I think, as a police agency of giving somebody the benefit of the doubt that they will leave. Hey, you're on private, telling somebody, hey, you're on private property.
Yeah.
You need to move along. Yeah, I'll move along. And we'll take you at your word. And maybe I'm working today, but I'm off for the next 3, 4, 5 days, whatever. And the officer B comes on the next day and says, hey, you need to move along. And so it was a not a very coordinated effort. It caught us a little bit flat-footed, this influx, something we hadn't seen or had dealt with in the past.
Yeah.
And now it's at just full speed ahead in front of us. And we're talking, like we said, hundreds of people at once to start managing. So we, like I said, we educated people what was going on, all facets, the landowners and also the people that were trespassing, encouraged them to get out of there. And then the last effort is enforcement. Then we would take enforcement action.
And the tricky thing with enforcement back then is, as an average patrol officer, which I was a detective when all this kicked off, but your average patrol officer, because this was a new problem, wasn't something we had dealt with for enforcement. And so our camping ordinance, our shopping cart ordinances, our whatever, the ordinances associated, they didn't fit well. It was a new problem for an old set of laws. And so we were getting, you would likely get a different answer one cop to the next. And because well-intended cops just didn't know the statutes, partly because they were poorly written and partly because we weren't using them. And so we're dealing with that as these little micro groups are popping up on public property also, especially as we force them out of private property. So most of them left willingly. I bet we didn't make many arrests for trespassing. I would say probably everyone left willingly. I wouldn't swear to that, but my memory is that most people left willingly.
Yeah, arrests were made in subsequent days and months. People that either left and came back, or just refused to go. But it was few and far between.
So ultimately, the big undeveloped commercial properties are vacated and they are displaced then to the public eye. So you squeeze a problem over here, but it's got to go somewhere. And so the bulk of the individuals dealing with substance use, dealing with homelessness, dealing with mental illness now are in city parks, city streets, and right in the center of town, right in the forefront of the public eye. And now we've almost created a bigger problem by protecting the private property rights, only in that now it was highly visible. And so now anybody who's turned on the news and saw West Coast cities, and it's not unique to the West Coast, but we had people lining the streets, garbage, tents, sleeping bags, just shopping carts everywhere, motorhomes, abandoned vehicles, just a real community problem. And so we had to shift again from private property to now we have this public property issue. And at the same time, we're dealing with Ninth Circuit Court ruling, correct?
Yeah.
Comes in during the same time period. It's because we're not the only community dealing with this. Seattle's dealing with it. Tacoma's dealing with it. Spokane, Boise, Portland, and whatever. And so Boise's ruling comes out, and how did that hurt us? At least our ability to solve a community problem.
Whenever a ruling comes down from the courts, it causes the police to have to reassess whatever the actions were being done prior to be in line with what the courts are requiring now. So it caused a pause in handling or addressing issues of people on public right-of-ways. With the Boise ruling, essentially it said that you couldn't have a law that criminalized human existence, just existing and being. You can't have a law that says you have to have a home. And as we started to digest that through our legal advisors, we made some tweaks we being the city council, made some tweaks to our camping law.
But before
that all takes months, better part of a year to happen.
What I was going to say is, as a police officer, we see this ruling come down in real time. Boise says you can't basically criminally enforce homelessness. You can't make homelessness a crime. So the command staff at the time and the hierarchy of police supervisors are saying, pump the brakes, because we now have this case ruling. We don't fully nobody fully understands what it means, but what we know is right this moment, it means we're not enforcing this. So then there's almost like a hiatus on any enforcement. Everybody's leery. Can we even arrest for trespassing? What about park hours? Whatever. And so it creates like a total hiatus on enforcement, and that only allows the problem to fester and grow unaddressed. And so in the meantime, legal advisors are sending interpretations to us so that we can work around. Lawmakers are making laws that are enforceable under this, because we still have a responsibility not to criminalize homelessness, but to ensure equal access to public places. So people still have the right to use the parks for recreation, what they were intended for. And so we have to be able to keep the trails clean and the picnic areas clear of encampments so that they can still be used for birthday parties and whatever else. And so the lawmakers are doing that. Legal interpretations are helping us navigate Boise, but we had a problem. And so you and I are detectives at the same time during, I think, the bulk of that.
2017, 18, around there was, I got a tail end. I was a corporal on patrol before going into the detectives in 2017. And I'd made some projects out of some areas that were really being abused. You mentioned campers and trailers. We had a whole city block of a dead-end street that was from the street where it was lined with derelict cars and RVs, and the adjoining right-of-ways up to the private property owners was just encampment and just filth that had accumulated. And we have some laws against this, that this isn't about criminalizing homelessness. This is about having order in the city streets and making them clean for use, not a cesspool, not an RV with their black and gray water tank just free flowing.
Yeah. And so you went into detectives. Patrol officers are dealing with navigating these ambiguous laws. We have encampments sprouting up for several city blocks. And when I came out of detectives in spring of 2019, back to patrol, it was like peak. We had in a couple of our major, like crown jewel city parks, we had huge unsanitary encampments that were causing tons of public outcry.
Yeah, that time was definitely when the parks received the brunt of it, because as we're also interpreting the Boise ruling, other non-governmental organizations are providing advice to people of pinpointing, here's where you can go to camp. It's got to be on public property.
Yeah.
And so we're hearing the public property has to be open for this, and people are being told that, and it just the tsunami hit, perfect storm of the parks carrying the brunt of it, because we are a city with a lot of very nice parks, very nice open green areas that are flat and they have tree cover. If you were going to pick a campsite out in the woods, you would pick our parks. Right. They're beautiful.
Meanwhile, we have well-meaning service organizations advertising their services through whatever means, whatever channels they advertise. We are still seeing immigration to our community from other communities. Right. And we're being told, we heard you had this service or that service, or we had this service organization would help us with dental care or medical care or housing or whatever. It's being advertised. And so we were seeing people actually travel a long distance in response to advertisements they were seeing from our well-meaning service organizations.
We'd start to see consistent, like people bought in bulk tents to hand out.
Yeah.
We come across people that they couldn't tell you what state they last had an ID, and they've just been living the nomadic life, and they have the same tent and sleeping bag as a guy who's been that I've known here for his whole life.
Yeah.
Like, how did this happen? Well, they got connected somewhere with some of these resources to continue to live outdoors.
So actually, that reminds me, before the big commercial property that we were talking about earlier with the really elaborate, there was a fire there not long after it was cleared out, if you remember.
Right. Oh, yeah. There was 2 fires. One was a
couple dozen acres burned.
Yeah.
Started from a homeless encampment fire. And after that, there were far fewer, but there were still some. And if you recall, we had a homicide in the property that we referred to as the hatchet homicide.
Oh, yeah.
And so hatchet homicide was my case, and the suspect is arrested pretty quickly, the probable suspect, based on a witness who saw the crime. And I'm sitting, in the interview room just like this, and I'm just having a conversation. We're getting ready to get into, so what happened today? And part of that is rapport building, right? You just don't start a conversation with, so you had a hatchet, take it from there. Right. You got to take me to the beginning. Where are you from?
Yeah.
And so he tells me that he and his girlfriend are from Florida. And I somehow I knew that they were not hitchhikers, but like street kids. They were in their 20s. Travelers. And so I already knew that. So, you're from Florida. So what brings you up here? He goes, well, my girlfriend and I are down in Florida and we're doing whatever down there. And she has some dental problems. She's got bad teeth. I said, okay. He goes, and we're looking for what available services there are. And we heard that y'all had good, free dental care. I said, all the way in Florida, you heard that Washington State had like free dental care or good dental care? He goes, no, Longview. I said, what? He goes, oh yeah. He goes, we got a flyer through one of their service organizations that's like, send us your needy and homeless, and we have services available. We want to help you. And so he and she get connected with this organization, and they hitchhike and take buses, and they weren't without means. They had some money. And so they worked their way up here over the course of just a couple days. And they're in this camp, this area of encampment, which was down by a Walmart. And while they're at Walmart for supplies, within a couple of days of getting to town, they meet the victim, the will-be victim of the homicide, and the girlfriend takes a liking to him. And after all this, traveling across the country, coast to coast.
Oh, no.
They're hanging out in a van driven by a guy named Coyote. Mm-hmm. So they're hanging out in Coyote's van at the Walmart, and after a little while, this homicide suspect gets suspicious that something might be up. And by a little while, I mean, they're in the van for a few hours, but he's like, there's chemistry here. Something's going on. And so he, at some point, is like, we best get going back to camp. And she goes, I think I'm just going to hang with these guys. And she had taken a liking to the will-be victim. Mm-hmm. And so he says, I'll help you get your stuff. I'll walk with you guys to camp. And so the girlfriend, the suspect, and the victim walk back to their camp there in the field. adjacent to the Walmart. And while she's packing her stuff, she's Winnie the Pooh in the hole, like in the tent, just packing her things. The will-be victim, and the suspect tells me this later, he says, I'm standing there, and you know what he says to me? He says, don't worry, bro. I had a girl do this to me one time too. And turns out he was standing there. He had been chopping firewood, just kind of fidgeting or whatever, but he's holding his hatchet when the guy says that. And that was it. They had had enough. And he hatcheted him to death. So anyways, the point of that rabbit trail was these folks were brought here by the promise of resources, which were provided. And so that's kind of the double-edged sword of living in a community that has ample resources, is it pulls, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, I remember seeing those flyers and Facebook posts that were, advertising the services that you can get here.
Yeah. So in the meantime, we are trying to navigate these tricky laws. We're doing our best to keep folks off private property at the request of the landowners. We are in the process of helping local lawmakers create enforceable laws. And by we, command staff at the time. And I'm back out on the road 2019. It's a situation where the parks are overrun. It's the community has a very low tolerance for this. Some communities, bless them, they've got a high tolerance. This community, low tolerance for what is happening. And so the outcry is loud and clear. And so I'm on graveyard patrol at the time. I'm a patrol corporal, and we are given marching orders, like, get a handle on this. Mm-hmm. And the tool we had at the time was park hours. And so there was a period where we weren't sure if we could enforce park hours, which allowed a large encampment to grow at one of the largest parks in town, probably the most popular park in town. And we're told, you're good on park hours. They were adjusted, whatever. And so we start a blitz enforcement on park hours.
Yeah, at 2019, you and I were peers. We were both working as corporals, and we were working the same side. When you had taken over graveyard, when I had taken from me when I started in 2019. Mm-hmm. So we kind of flipped back and forth. Mm-hmm. So it brought a consistent messaging mm-hmm. and a consistent effort to carry out this mission.
Right.
Because we were on a mission.
Yeah.
This was going to happen.
And so where park hours evolved is when we were dealing with the same people for park hours violations, which the park hours, to clarify, were, you may not be in the park after X hour, 10 or 11, depending on the time of year, right?
Right.
And so if you were in the park, with few exceptions, like if you were doing exercise and you were running or cycling through the park, that was allowed. So there were very, very limited exceptions. But if you were sleeping in the park, camping in the park, you were in violation of park hours. And so this is just a ticket,
that's important to know. It's like
equivalent to like a speeding ticket. It's $101 infraction or whatever. So not criminal. No,
that's the critical thing, is it not being criminal. So we would get people that would tell us, hey, this is a park hour violation happening. We'd come across somebody and give them $100 ticket.
Yeah.
Now, to the person complaining that's upset about this happening, $100, maybe it's not that much to them. Mm-hmm. It's not nothing. It's a lot to somebody who has $0 and who isn't motivated to leave. If I told you I'm going to give you a ticket, which is mm-hmm. less money than jaywalking.
Yeah, right.
Are you motivated to leave?
Yeah.
Well, if you don't, I might give you another one tomorrow.
Right.
So then people are just like, oh, you're here to give me a ticket. Cool. Need something to wipe with.
Which, because we were highly motivated patrol problem solvers, led us to an interpretation. This was just our multifaceted approach. Okay, if someone is given a ticket and now they are knowingly in violation of park hours tomorrow or anytime later, so they've been previously cited, you could argue that under the Washington State Statute of Criminal Trespass Second Degree, they are knowingly remaining unlawfully, which is a criminal offense. So what we would do is, if we came across people who had been previously cited, they've been educated, they've been cited, they've been given every option to choose a lawful place to spend the night, then they would be arrested for criminal trespass. And this was the expectation of the department, of the community, and it only came after years of education leading up to minimal enforcement through infraction and providing other resources, just doing our best to do everything not to take people to jail. But for those holdouts, which there were many, we were arresting for criminal trespass second degree for violating the park hours knowingly after being cited previously. And this worked. We were able to use this tool to keep the parks free of people after hours. Anybody, because everyone was either left on their own or we arrested them. And so this worked. Overnight, we solved the problem in the parks. But what did we do?
It can sound callous that the cops are coming in to take people out of a park that no kids are using during the middle of the night. A person could be asking me, what's the point? That sounds like a wasted resource. What I saw happening down there at the parks was it wasn't humane and or sanitary. I started going down at dusk when we had people that started following the park's hours. Like, fine, we're going to occupy the park from open to close, 15 hours. They would drag everything they owned to the park. And then come the witching hour, be it 10 or 11, depending on the time of year, they would start hauling everything out and go into the city right-of-way or wherever.
Right-of-way being like the parking strips on the side of the road.
Parking lot.
Yeah.
Something that is not regulated.
Yeah.
So I would start going down, and I was doing outreach, or at least making inroads with the population for years prior, probably a decade. And I went down there one night, and I saw some people kind of scurrying about at the edge we have a lake, a beautiful lake in the middle of our town, that this park is part of the lake, and they would camp along the lake's edge. I see people scurrying about towards the part where it slopes down towards the lake. And I'll hear people kind of screaming. They're not screaming like this, like an assault or a robbery is happening. It's just like wails and screaming of like fright. Now, what's going on? So I shine my light down there, and I see someone with a broom, and they're trying to sweep away all the rats that are coming.
Right.
And what had happened is all the 15 hours of living and littering and open food had brought in the rats. A very unsanitary situation. So nightly, I started going down so I could try to help keep at bay the rats so they didn't pack up the rats or get bitten by rats that were there. So this isn't just we're being the jerks and clearing out a park. This is a sanitary issue because those rats were going to still be around during the day when the kids showed up.
So this is a good opportunity to talk about another thing that happens. So I live in this community, you live in this community, we go to churches in this community, and people want to help. Like, people with means want to help. They want to see, they don't fully understand the problem sometimes, but they have this simple view of homelessness as someone who can't find a house and has no food. Right. And so as people, what do? Well, we try to feed them. I don't have room in my house to bring in people. I don't know these people, and so that's not really an option. But I can feed people, and so
got an extra blanket,
blankets, food. Clothes.
Yeah, clothes. Right.
Because it seems obvious. How can I help these people? It's coming into winter. How can I help these individuals? And so, what happens then with these well-meaning people? Carloads of stuff dropped off with these individuals. What happens?
Yeah. So a story I have, and if we're fast forward just a little bit here, people went from the parks and open spaces towards our city hall, and there's where the crescendo occurs. It's everything, the great culmination of all things, all people that were in the community that were homeless came to one spot.
Because the street cops are just squeeze,
right.
and
solving problems, creating more problems.
And the people are just the individuals are getting upset. Like, every night we lay our heads down, you wake us up, and it's like you're laying your head down in a place that's not lawful. And so they're like, where do we go? And so every night we're squeeze to one single night where you say it crescendos, and there's a pilgrimage from all over town to overnight, dozens, if not hundreds of people show up at the city hall downtown in the parking lot along the parking strip. Overnight, there's a camp there.
Yeah, at the height, there was over 100 people.
Right.
And, it's the city hall occupies a city block, 4 square, and it had camps, 3 of the 4 of the legs of it. So you brought up well-meaning people, which is great. Like we too have a heart to help out. Our officers are helping people out. I've seen them be very generous to people. But the key is knowing what the need is, not what you think the need is. So at the time, I was working during the day shift, and I would head over to City Hall to try to see what I could problem solve as people were camping there. And inevitably, house citizens show up and they're like, I want to help. And I want to drop off food. This was about Thanksgiving time. So Thanksgiving, people were saying, hey, I'm going to come by on Thursday. I'm going to drop stuff off. And I'd like, hey, have you coordinated that with anybody? Nope, just my family. We've decided we're going to do it. You multiply that by a couple dozen people that are on addition to already organizations that had planned Thanksgiving feeds. What we had on Thanksgiving weekend, because people would have their Thanksgiving and then show up with the leftovers on Friday. That weekend was mayhem with turkey carcasses, stuffing, potatoes, green bean casserole, rolls. Imagine just the typical American Thanksgiving table, but an entire city block.
Yeah.
And people that are full. And it's just still sitting there with no means to get rid of it. So that's what was happening is people would come up and they're tossing blankets out. It's going to get cold. They're tossing blankets out. And we would inevitably come by the next day and throw dumpsters full of blankets because people didn't want these blankets or didn't need blankets. They needed other things. And I remember taking people when I could, take people for a walk around the camp. And I'd have
the City Hall camp.
The City Hall camp. I'd give them a spiel of, here, it's critical that you know what the need is before you start solving the problem. And by no means did I pretend to know what the core problem was, but I could tell on the individual level on many of the people there, I knew what their barriers were and what their needs were. And so I'd come across people and they'd say, hey, I got a great solution for this homeless problem. We need to build more homes. And that's one of the many solutions that are out there. It's not wrong, but not everybody wants to live in a home. And that I could see people like cause them to step back and think for a second, like, what are you talking about? And I would say, who are you to say how this person should live? Because I know several people out there, many don't want to be sheltered. They love living the outdoor life. They love camping, and that's just what they want to do. And then others will, we need to get some more job resources. Awesome. That would be great too. But not everybody here wants a job. Not everybody here is employable. You may have a job at your bakery that you want, but maybe the person doesn't qualify because they can't keep a food handler's card. But I don't know. But it's on an individual level. So one day I was taking a person for a walk and I'm giving them this spiel. And I get to the end of it, and I mentioned to them about how not everybody wants to be sheltered. Mm-hmm. And I am standing at this tent, and I could never forget. I don't know who this person is that's in the tent. It is a person who I didn't know, someone new to our area. Tent is closed. I don't even know there's somebody in this tent. And I say, like, not everybody wants to have a home. And the guy from inside screams out, "Hey, man, brother, all I want to do is smoke weed and live free."
And you didn't set him up for this.
I did not. I couldn't have set it up any better if I tried. And just to look at this person, like, throw my hands up, like, what do you say to that? To that end, there are people down there that did need a job. There are people down there that did need a blanket, that did need food. But it wasn't the vast majority. So what I started seeing is there's a disconnect between all the helping agencies that are around to actually help solve the problem. We can't have 5 agencies that their sole mission is we're going to feed the homeless.
Yeah.
While no agencies are helping to make people not be homeless. And everyone is fighting for dollars in these organizations to keep running. And a lot of them find grants, be it state or federal grants. Through those grants, they have to have an application of here's how we're going to address this. And the grants are, we're handing out money for organizations to address these issues. But you have 5, 10 different organizations all rowing on the same side. You're going to go in circles. And that's what I saw happening. So what we saw happening.
Right.
And that's not to bash the organizations. They had a heart to help. They had a niche that they wanted to serve, but it wasn't coordinated.
And so we end up with a very visible problem at City Hall. It becomes a political issue overnight. The community is crying out to the city government, like, it's on now. Look what you've created, and there's finger pointing and there's blame. But one way or the other, we have this issue on City Hall property, and something else needs to happen. And so there are a couple of meetings, hugely attended by the community, and the city council creates a temporary solution by creating a space on Alabama Street for a temporary unhosted encampment. Right? They've recognized it can't be at City Hall. It's interfering with city government business. So we have this other plot of city property that we will temporarily, was it 90 days?
Right, yeah.
90 days.
At the end of 2019, they decided to open up this already owned government piece of land that was undeveloped.
Right.
Down in an industrial area.
Yep.
Out of the way.
January 1st to May 30th were the terms of it, if I remember correctly.
March.
I'm sorry, yeah. March. Yeah. 90 days.
90 days.
So
Jan 1, March 31st.
90 days
2020
for us to solve this problem. Like, we hear you, we hear the community, the unhoused community crying out. We're tired of the cops chasing us around town. Tell us where we can go.
Interpreting the Boise ruling about having to have a spot for people.
Give us a space. And the rest of the community, the others in the community, and of course there are housed individuals who are saying help these individuals, but then there are very vocal people saying, enough. You've got this mess. It's a disaster.
Yeah.
Fix it. I don't want to drive by this. We were starting to see issues of motorists harassing, because it was right on the street. Motorists harassing these individuals. It was a big problem. And so they establish this unhosted encampment, and everybody, there's a big migration down because it wasn't nearby, and this camp pops up overnight in a mucky field. Well, it quickly became a mucky field. And then what happened?
Yeah, the camp. Imagine just a grassy area, backside of a shop. And that's all it was. And there was, you said unhosted. It was no rules.
Unregulated, yeah.
It was unregulated. Here you go. Go and exist on this piece of property for however you want to. Now, I am a more orderly and rule-oriented type individual, and I think I mentioned before previously that as a Boy Scout, I'm used to camping with others and how orderly that looks. And I think the good intentioned people that created this camp kind of projected our own beliefs on how this would look. Oh, it's going to be, squared away. Couldn't have been any farther from squared away.
Yeah.
It became, you said muck. It became a literal garbage dump. There was times where you couldn't see the ground anymore because it was just accumulated garbage.
Vehicles, appliances, couches, beds, pallets, trash.
Yeah, right. There's not supposed to be any vehicles.
Yeah.
I heard weekend one, there was RVs that were pulled in.
A boat.
A boat.
Yep.
Motorcycles, carts that might have been RVs at one point. Now they're down to their chassis. you name it, if it could get hauled in, it was hauled in there.
Yeah.
So it became just mayhem.
Yep.
There was people that were building forts up into trees with no structural engineering was done, other than I had a piece of 2x4 and a nail into a tree, it looked like. And so that happened. There was, I don't know what the peak of that, hundreds of people moved into this camp over time,
really quickly, the population grew to hundreds. And so just the first 90 days, something important happened.
Exactly. That's what I was going to get to is,
okay.
We all know
yep.
what life looked like.
What happened in late winter, January, February, March, 2020.
Yeah. COVID.
And what did that mean for the camp?
So COVID went for the world. It shut everything down.
Yep.
Progress and just about everything shut down. Yep. So kicking people out of this camp on March 31st, the 2 weeks of the shutdown, well, we shut down on March 15th. Yep. So now we are at the end of that, coming back out of being shut down for two weeks, which was extended.
Right.
Nothing happened.
And so government's not meeting. So there's no progress being made towards a permanent resolution. There's an eviction moratorium in the state at some point. Right. The worst case scenario for this temporary situation, timing wise, landed in our laps. And so the city has this thing that they created that, based on the timing, there was nothing else that could be done. The camp is in place. We're not even meeting to discuss what we could do. And by we, I mean the city. And we're stuck with it. And so it's unregulated from the beginning by design. It's unhosted. There's nobody there, like, I was going to say enforcing rules, but there are no rules. It's just allowed to grow.
There's no referee even, just to keep people within some lines.
All the while, we're early stages of a pandemic that everybody thought was going to kill everyone. And so you're dealing with that. So you have like this huge public health emergency. You have an eviction moratorium, and we have this camp that over the next 6 months just blows up.
Yeah. The camp starts to, I was going to say devolve worse and worse as completely unsanitary, and it needs to be now cleaned up. And it was kind of a slow transition. We're going into uncharted waters here. We don't know what we're doing. This is the first time our city's ever had a unhosted camp. And we're trying to navigate the laws, practicalities, the physical barriers, all the barriers. And it became apparent it needed to be cleaned up a little bit and a little bit better organized. So a cleanup operation happened. People are told to temporarily move from one side to the other, gets cleaned out, starts to lay down maybe some lines so people know where to be in the lines, to come back to try to have just some semblance of order going back in.
Because this is just a free-for-all of tents and structures just filling this huge space.
You got one guy using a 20 by 20 plot and another person who's squeezed over into a corner. They have like a one-man pup tent. And there was no rhyme or reason other than like you laid your stuff down, you ruled that piece of land.
And just to paint a picture, or I'll put up a literal picture, we're talking like when you walk in, what's the atmosphere? What's it look like? I'll just start. So when you first walk in, it's just junk and debris. It's a lot like a third world country. So you have little shacks, tents, people everywhere, bicycles, lawnmowers, garbage, fires burning. You're walking over heaps of things. There's pathways through.
Sometimes you could see paths. Sometimes there wasn't. You couldn't see from one side to the other. You couldn't see a straight line for maybe 20 feet ahead of you because of the curves and way some things would be built up. Some things were down low. Chaos.
And so because you can't from the street see all the way in, it's a fairly large area of lawlessness where there probably was a hierarchy of government, self-governance inside in the anarchy, where you had powerful people pulling strings and things like that, but you had a micro environment of lawlessness.
Yeah, I mean, you said something when we pull up. Yeah, when the police pull up, an announcement went out through the camp.
Yeah.
You could hear them chiming to let people know that the police were here.
Yeah.
Nobody came out to greet us, so I can tell it wasn't because they were happy that the police were here and bring out the welcome mat. Like, I asked myself, why else would somebody be announcing the police are here, but for probable criminal activity?
And so we're dealing with all of the sorts of things you would imagine in a lawless place. Within the camp itself, we're dealing with drug overdoses. We're dealing with assaults
associated with the drug trade,
stabbing, shootings, thefts,
sexual assaults.
I personally responded to one stillborn baby in one of the tents. And so just a nightmare in the camp. And so that's all happening. The police response, which, because there's not it was on city property, so it wasn't like there was a house right next door. And so the calls we're getting there are from residents, or they are from city employees at the transit across the street or whatever. But it's safe to say we're not getting a call for everything that happens in there.
Right.
Right. So when we get called in there, we are wading into this mess without all the intel. And so that's all happening. There's an illicit drug trade, like you mentioned. And then in the midst of all this, the state of Washington has what we refer to as the Blake decision, which now, on top of everything else, the Blake decision complicates our work. How?
The drugs in my pants aren't my drugs, not my pants case. Yeah. It complicates things because it de facto made drugs, hard drugs, legal. We didn't have a crime to enforce when somebody had drugs. So it went from, at least people would hide their drug use from us, to being in the open. Now, we weren't necessarily seeing in the open the dealing, but walking up to tents with somebody actively shooting drugs in their veins, regular.
Right.
Smoking drugs out in the open, you can count on it daily.
Yeah. Which, if you walk back through the 2 decades before, we've gone a long ways, maybe not in the right direction, from when I first started, we were writing search warrants on the odor of burning marijuana.
Right, yeah.
And now we are walking by people injecting hard drugs into their veins, and we have no enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, different podcasts, that I worked narcotics for a bit of time. When I went into that field in 2001, we targeted people that were trafficking drugs. So if you were a drug dealer, you got usually 3-4 years for a delivery of drugs. And a term for a detective at that time was about 4 years. So generally, if you did a case, built up a case, sent a drug dealer to prison, usually they weren't getting out until you were done with your term. So I did my first term, and the drug laws, they started reducing the sentencing from years to months for drug dealing. And I remember on my last term, must have been around 2010, let's say, that a partner of mine built a case on somebody, convicted them of drug dealing, and they went off to prison and came back within the same calendar year, built a case, and sent them away for drug dealing again. And they were out before we completed our term. So I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the war on crime. I've never seen a war on crime in my career. I haven't seen a campaign or money that has supported a campaign for a war on drugs. But I have seen the product of being more lenient. And the Blake decision was, I would say, a critical failure in our state as an experiment of what it would look like to make drugs not completely, I should say, there was some nuance to it, de facto legal for people to use out in public area or to have. So
now we're dealing with this huge encampment, that the city's scrambling to try and figure out that has this lawless anarchy taking place within its walls or fences. We have no ability to enforce, no real ability to enforce the illegal drug use, which probably a separate podcast is the nexus to a lot of our criminal activity. And so we have like this perfect storm of problems sitting on top of the perfect storm that created the camp. And so while all this is happening, the neighborhood around, the residential and business area around the camp has lost its patience with this temporary thing that has now lasted 2 years, going on 3 years. And so the community starts to show up at city council meetings within the city government by the hundreds.
Yeah, they're rightfully upset.
They are upset.
They are held hostage in a way, like they have their business or home where it's been, and then this was brought in. So they're righteously upset about what's spilling over into their area.
Right. And so what's happening is the campers are cutting through the backside of the fence. And in order to do that, they're cutting through a business and they're going out into the neighborhood, which historically has a high crime rate anyway. And so now this neighborhood who's been plagued with high crime is dealing with this influx of high crime on top of the crime that they're already experiencing. And so everybody's really upset.
Yeah, things of high value for these people are walking away.
Yeah.
And things of low value like garbage are floating down in replace. So not only do I have to, a business owner has to go out and see that the copper piping is missing to their AC unit that they have to fix, but there's piles of garbage now left behind or feces.
Not to mention the camp can only support so many people, and eventually as years go by, not everyone's welcome in the camp, or not everyone wants to be in the camp. And so smaller offshoots of the camp, because the camp is the central hub of resources, all the food drop-offs and everything else, the daily resource collection is at the big camp. And so people don't want to go far from there. And so you have small camps set up on city property in other places, like the RV dump station that became like the summer spray park where people are filling their water in the non-potable water and setting up camps, and just like big takeover of smaller encampments. And that's all happening, and it comes to a head, and the city council chambers are packed with hundreds of people, standing room only. Side note, the AC broke that summer, and so it's 100 degrees in the council chambers, and everybody's crabby, and the community's screaming for answers. And so as a response, the police department takes the ownership of, well, while they figure out what to do legislatively, what can we do? Well, we can respond acutely to the criminal activity. Our resources on patrol are hugely limited, right? We have a high call volume, and so our ability to do much more than respond to calls for service is hampered by our staffing. And so our agency then, and I'm in the command staff at the time, I'm the patrol commander at the time, we decide we will staff overtime patrols. So we staff foot patrols, bike patrols nightly. And it was like fish in a barrel. So every night for months, we had officers on foot patrol who were just walking the neighborhood around like the old days. And we're catching burglaries in progress. We're catching countless trespasses. We're recovering stolen vehicles, you name it. And so we, within a month, have a huge impact on the crime in the community because we are just putting the hammer down. And it was expensive because we're staffing, high dollar overtime night after night after night for multiple people, and nobody's working alone. And so it was hugely effective though in curbing the acute problem of crime. And that wasn't sustainable because it was so expensive, but we did see after, let's say, a month of that, it became harder to go out and catch some of these criminal acts in progress. And so that's all happening while the city's also working on a transition of the camp to something else. And so do you want to talk about that?
As the city was working on a plan to have more of an improved area, more of a defined area, and they looked at these pallet homes. And part of that transition, one of the community outreach organizations started staffing one of their outreach people inside the camp. And that started happening once we had one of the phases of transition was removing people from the larger area, putting them to a smaller area, defined area, to get a better head count, to start walking in some rules that needed to happen for some semblance of order. This outreach coordinator person was put there by a nonprofit organization to try to engage in some outreach to help us out, as us being the city and the police, to facilitate out the resource. The city is working on contracts like what's going to be the best type of defined area, say this housing. So they decided to go with some tiny homes, and that required the facility to be upgraded. You couldn't just put these tiny homes on ground, the mud that was there. Place had to be literally excavated, and Phil brought in blacktopped and ready to roll with these. I think there's room for 50 units of these tiny homes, pallet homes. So that became the next step for the city. But while that was also happening on the facility-wise, the police department brought in a behavioral health unit. That's kind of when they started.
That's your unit now.
Which is who I'm with.
It's in infancy
now.
Yeah. And
it looks a lot different now than it did then. Day one, they didn't really have a defined space for themselves. There was a cubby of an office that had been used at one point, then remodeled for something else, then was kind of a catch-all. We all have those corners and drawers in our homes, and that's what this area was. Like there's rooms for some desks. So 3 contract employees from a local mental health agency contracted with us. They were not our city employees, but they were people that were vetted to be co-responders with us, us being the police officers out there on the street. And they were given the broad mission from the administration to help us when we come across people that are in crisis, but the tools that we have around our tool belts aren't going to solve the problem. We're not going to be able to handcuff our way out of this mental health crisis. That's silly. We need your help to bridge that gap. So that started. And what we found is another layer of bureaucracy that happens. So you have a non-governmental operation, which was the employer of these crisis responders, working with a governmental operation. And not always do those two types of organizations work well together. Mm-hmm. Government tends to go slow and it's fixed in its ways. And the private businesses oftentimes have more flexibility for operation. But they're driven more by dollars and cents, where the governmental operations generally has a defined budget to work within. Mm-hmm. And we in our organization are fairly linear in our hierarchy. We know who our one boss is, where their organization, they had many bosses giving them conflicting information. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, we, here's the mission, here's what needs to be accomplished, and you need to go accomplish it, butted heads with what they were getting from their bosses. Came a mess. If you can imagine having multiple bosses tell you what they think you should be doing on a myriad of things, it bogs things down.
Police agencies are unique compared to the clinical world that organization lives in. Police organizations function in decentralized command, and that was very uncomfortable for this mental health provider. So when those contract employees came to us, we work on a model where it is, here's the guardrails, your parameters, commander's intent, let us know if you need us. And that was very uncomfortable for the employees, although they've warmed up to it now. But it was in conflict with what their managers at the mental health provider it was in conflict with their expectations, and so we constantly were running up against their micromanagement of these employees, getting in the way of the model of first responder. It's not compatible with micromanagement. You can't micromanage decisions being made on an individual level in real time out on the street during a crisis. It just doesn't work. Police officers can't function that way. Crisis responders cannot function that way. You need employees who understand the SOPs and policies, who understand the mission and the commander's intent, and that you just have to trust them to make the right decision. We work that way. It was in conflict with the clinical model that they were used to, and we were just constantly butting heads with the first level supervisors and middle managers at that organization.
And I would say the biggest thing, the biggest hurdle is the way we approach risk.
Yeah.
Their organization is risk adverse. Mm-hmm. They do the best they can to have zero risk. Mm-hmm. And in policing, we are risk managers, which means there's rarely zero risk. Mm-hmm. We train to go into the door when people are shooting, to go save people. On a risk management, if you were to be a risk manager, you would say, employees, do not go and do that.
Yeah.
We do the opposite. And that's a bit extreme, but that's where we start and how we mitigate risk. Mm-hmm. We just mitigate. And so as we're discussing with them, hey, we need you to do these things, they have their risk managers on the other side saying, no, wear a bulletproof vest, don't get out of the car, don't leave the office. And meanwhile, the cop's over on the side of the road saying, hey, come over here. Mm-hmm. We need you right here, right now, because we have mitigated the risk to an acceptable level for us. And what we've learned is an acceptable level for the police officer is a lot different than an acceptable level to a person behind a desk at a private organization.
Right. So this behavioral health unit is getting off the ground late summer 21, and that is timed not on purpose, but that happens to coincide with the timing of the creation of this transition to the tiny home village, which is important because there's 50 of them, and that means that hundreds of people are going to be displaced when we close down a camp that is holding hundreds of people.
Twice that. Easily, yeah.
I think at its peak, it was hundreds of people. And so, but as we got closer to it being shut down, people are voluntarily finding other places to be. But by the end, there are still many people who are going to be displaced. And so the behavioral health unit became, along with the city's community outreach coordinator, became our connection to the individuals who didn't look like they were going to be housed in these tiny houses, and so that it's not a surprise in 30, 60 days when this all shuts down and you're told you got to vacate the property, how can we assist you in the meantime? So it was the first step in education before because we've now got some time. We saw what happens if you work quickly and you just move everyone into the camp. That's how we got where we were. And so we are learning from those previous experiences. We know that we are about to displace individuals. So being proactive and getting ahead of that, the behavioral health unit in its infancy, the community outreach coordinator, both of which before they are our own employees, they are trying to bridge that gap in services.
You mentioned the community outreach person. It was critical that we, as the city, employed our own outreach coordinator. 'Cause to this point, we didn't have one. Mm-hmm. And now the camp is transitioning from lawless land to a hosted camp, an organization that is going to be in charge and control of the daily operation. So that outreach coordinator that had been in the dumpster camp is now no longer there. They get hired by the city in our building and planning section. It was again, like I said, a position that had not existed. And so this person who has a decade of experience and had been deeply entrenched with this population for a long time gets hired by the city manager in the building and planning section, which is located in the city hall. It's away from the police department. It is someone that many of us had a relationship from working at camp, but City Hall is not the place where the cops usually hang out. Our City Hall is many blocks away. It's not a facility that we have at the patrol level interaction with.
And that made sense. Like, it wasn't completely illogical. That made sense because the community development department or whatever is at City Hall, and she falls under that department. So
it wasn't illogical. No, by any means.
Yeah.
I just pointed out because going forward,
Yeah.
As I am out working, trying to coordinate efforts of the city, because I'll go back to one of the big problems before was lack of coordination between agencies. And now I, as a police officer, are trying to coordinate some cleanup or some outreach. So I have to go over to City Hall to talk to somebody who is answering phones for building and planning conversations. And I was pulling my hair out and frustrated. Like, we created the same problem we were trying to fix with this lack of coordination of efforts. And meanwhile, our behavioral health unit is working under a different agency for our agency, and have a conflict of mission. So I have an outreach coordinator doing other than outreach coordinator. I don't even have an outreach. The city has an outreach coordinator that has a conflict of mission that we're doing with the behavioral health unit, who has some conflicts of mission what they're doing. You can see the problem.
Right. And so the good news is, right on the heels of this, our contract with the mental health provider is coming to an end. We have an opportunity, based on what we've learned, to bring these employees in-house. So the program's up and running. Contracting made sense. When we were starting the behavioral health unit, we didn't know anything about crisis responders. We didn't know anything about credentials or what that work would look like. We didn't even know if the program would work or if it would still be here. And so contracted employees made sense in the initial planning. Now we know it's critical to operation. We know that it's hugely beneficial to the patrol officer on the street, that they are reducing the patrol officer response to calls related to subjects experiencing acute mental illness. And so it's hugely beneficial. So we bring those employees to the department as city employees, and then they fall under our direct chain of command. We are no longer contracting them. Some of the individuals we had previously contracted with, they apply for the jobs within the city because it was a competitive selection process. But these are experienced folks who'd been doing the job, and so overnight they become city employees without any gap in service. And now the police department has these individuals on staff, but they're functioning basically the same, although it's come a long ways from where they first started. They are functioning without a first level supervisor. In fact, they pretty much did their own thing. They came to me as the division commander as needed. They would coordinate some of their day-to-day stuff with the patrol sergeant. And then there was a sergeant who had a very broad span of control over many employees. That was considered the direct supervisor. But the program was plateauing what it could do without a well, I'm laying the groundwork for how you got introduced to the program. But that's jumping ahead a little bit, right? Because right now we have camp closing, and we have, despite our best efforts to educate people, get individuals services before the camp closes. The camp closes, the tiny home village opens, and individuals are displaced into the community. You're on patrol at the time?
Yes.
So you're a patrol sergeant at the time. And now we have this huge displacement of individuals out back into the community, which was really reminiscent of what it looked like in 2019, where we have micro camps springing up all over town in medians, on sidewalks, on private property. And we're not back where we started, but it's really familiar.
Yeah, the cycle back into the next iteration of, and now it's back to enforcement again. We've educated and encouraged, and now we have the laws are now in place that follow within case law, and but provide for people to actually exist on the streets with the camping ordinance that we have. We made it unlawful, a more robust to steal shopping carts. You can't just grab a Safeway shopping cart and use it as your own for the rest of your life. That we started taking a hard stance on that after our businesses with shopping carts were losing thousands upon thousands of dollars weekly with shopping carts and baskets that would just walk away. And so we put a curb to that. It was an enforcement operation that was still led with education and encouragement. And now we had the ability to have an outreach coordinator and a behavioral health unit folks, crisis responders, have the ability to bridge the gap of the resources. So instead of the police officer trying, handing a trifold pamphlet, like, here are the resources, read on whichever one fits you the best and call them. It was more of a hand holding. We could go, I have this person here. It seems like they have some barriers that you could help them with, get them stable and moved on. Mm-hmm. That became very effective for a patrol officer. If we came across somebody, here is this person, what they're doing. Can you help them so they're not doing this again? Because we honestly don't want to go the jail route to try to solve this problem. But for if the person just chooses to not engage in any services, chooses to continue to commit the crimes. So just like anybody in our community, if you choose that path, you're going to be choosing to go to jail.
So what has happened as we got to the closure of the unhosted camp and the opening of the tiny home, we've got this behavioral health unit that's up and running full steam. It's looking a lot like it does now at its peak. In that interim, we have worked with lawmakers to iron out our camping ordinances, our shopping cart ordinances. The drug ordinance has self-corrected, and our city proactively did some things to make it enforceable. And so we've got drugs are illegal again. We have very clear camping ordinances, when you can and cannot be camping, on what periods of time you can be doing those things. We have given the police officers on the street all these tools for enforcement, so that when we displace all these individuals, we have tools available, and shift to shift, team to team understands the expectations, so that A side swing shift is enforcing the same side as B side swing, the same things as B side swing shift. Like department wide, we have a clear mission. Every individual has been given opportunities through education to correct this problem on their own. But if you're dealing with the habitual offenders, we're taking people to jail. And that's actually something we didn't cover when we were talking about Camp Alabama, which is one of the huge hurdles we ran into during that same time period is our jail closed. Like lots of jails, they were not taking low-level offenses. And so at the same time, our laws were a mess, drugs were legal, crime is running rampant. No one's taking misdemeanor crimes. And so now, and that was for a couple of years, we were not putting people in jail. And so it was just a horrible, perfect storm. Yeah. Flash forward to, we've now regrouped. We got our feet under us. We've got these laws that are enforceable. The jail is now accepting these offenses, and we are using them as a tool to say, here is the education. We highly encourage you to take this resource that we've made available to you to help yourself. But if you're not willing to, we will put you in jail. And contrary to what people will say, for example, we will take someone to jail for unlawful camping or trespassing or something like that. And the naysayers will say, well, that's what they want. They want to go to jail.
Oh, no.
It is not what they want. Well, it's a warm bed and a meal. And it is that. I'm here to tell you, they do not want to go to jail. Now, maybe occasionally on a snowy night, someone's like, jail would be better than this. But for the most part, no one wants to go to jail. They are not looking to be arrested. And so I push back on that. That has not been my experience.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
Through my career, there's been a person now and then that it seems like this person just wants to go to jail for whatever silly reason.
Yeah.
But that is, rare.
Right.
People want to not go to jail. And they're often motivated by drug use.
Right.
You got to get sober in jail.
Right.
And it isn't fun in jail. Like if you've never been to jail, it's not fun. And
the novelty of, well, it's warm here and the food is whatever, wears off really quick, because we just talked about how there's food drop-offs at these places every night. No one should be going hungry in our community right now. There are so many resources for food. So I would push back to say that there are people who are on the street struggling with food shortage because there's so much food available. And
our homeless population, I bet, mirrors what the U.S. population is. I heard there's a recent stat, over 50% of U.S. citizens are obese.
Yeah.
Same for our homeless population.
So if you, anywhere where these individuals are collecting, you will find just cans of food, rotten bread, rotten meat, there's an abundance to the point where it's going to waste on the street corners. It's just in heaps and piles, which is one of the biggest things we were cleaning out of the camp when we had the old camp, was we would pull in dump trucks and just collect blankets and clothes and food waste and just all these donated items just going into the dumpster, because there's only so much you can eat in one day. And so we've got our legs under us. The jail's open. We've got some laws in place. What will be your team is out giving resources, providing education. The police officers are out giving resources, providing education. The community outreach coordinator, still working under the city government, is providing resources, connecting individuals. And the camp closes and people are displaced and we're back to arresting people. But now we have the tools available, the jail's open, and we are not messing around. We are breaking up camps daily. We are really enforcing laws for anybody who's a holdout. After all of this education and encouragement, anybody who is still digging in and defying the law is doing it intentionally and is refusing to accept the resources that have been made available to them. And our community made it very clear, we will not tolerate this. And so the police department takes a strict, low discretion position on enforcing these laws. And so folks are going to jail. Every day, numerous folks are going to jail. And so that you're working as a sergeant on patrol, that is working. We are seeing that change behavior. Contrary to what we just said earlier, like, people do not want to go to jail. So we're seeing it change behavior. People who don't have ties to this community, the immigrant, and I don't mean like international immigrants. I mean people who came here from other United States communities. They're leaving. Out of towners. They're going to a place where they feel like where they're more welcome by the community. This community, low tolerance for it. And so those individuals are leaving, and we see the population of holdouts shrinking and shrinking and shrinking through enforcement and the education and availability of resources. There's another issue that kind of coexists with this issue, and that is abandoned vehicles, abandoned vehicles on the streets and RVs on the streets that people are using for housing. And at the same time, like I said, coexisting, we're getting complaints about these issues, and you hit that head on also.
Yeah, the quality of life things, the broken windows theory has become controversial. As a street cop, I was venture to guess most street cops out there has their own broken windows thing that has happened, where the theory being, you put a broken window vehicle out, it's going to attract more crime, more windows going to get broken. You put an intact vehicle out, it'll stay intact. There's way more nuance and other things into it, but the core of it, when you have the sight of a derelict vehicle, it tends to attract more derelict vehicles. A problem seems to attract more problem areas, and we talk about revitalizing blocks and cities by you start making them look better and they start to be better. So yeah, we had hundreds, if not over 1,000 reports of abandoned vehicles or RVs or just other type things stored on the city streets. So me and a couple of our community service officers decided to do a blitz campaign to just remove these derelict vehicles that were like literally melting into the city streets. Some of them looked like you needed to mow around them so you could actually see them, the grass growing up around them on the paved city street. Cars that hadn't been registered for years, just sitting collecting moss. So to help out the people in the neighborhoods, we used a bunch of our local tow companies. A couple tow companies promised to give us 1 or 2 tow trucks, and one tow company offered to give us as many drivers as we needed for the days that we were going to do it. And we utilized everything we could to legally remove as many vehicles as we could off the street, tagging and towing them to make a better area. So people actually park. We had people come out, would be clapping that we're towing vehicles that hadn't been able to park there for years. People I have been lived here for years, and that whatever it was has been across the street. And you just, it's nice when people come out and clap for you for towing a vehicle.
So we were doing strict enforcement. The behavioral health unit's still doing their thing, and that program is evolving to, let's jump all the way to January 2024. The program takes its most dramatic shift probably since its creation, and then the adoption or bringing them in-house. January 2024, the chief creates a sergeant position to create a crisis responder unit that's supervised directly by a sergeant assigned to that unit, and adds the community outreach coordinator as now a police department employee. So you have crisis responders, which at the time there were 6 positions. Mm-hmm. I don't believe they're all filled. They're still not all filled, but let's say there were 5. Are there 5 now?
We have 5
crisis responders, varying from master's level to bachelor's level, et cetera, of experience and degrees. The community outreach coordinator and a sergeant now make up this team, this like Swiss Army knife team that over the years since its creation, we've slowly morphed into this team that now has an enforcement wing with direct supervision, a police officer with firsthand knowledge of the laws, a direct conduit back to what the rest of the police department's doing. And now you have this Swiss Army knife of tools in the behavioral health unit, which now is your full-time job.
Right. The way I approached this was to go, what can I do to fit in with your group? Mm-hmm. Not here's what needs to get done. Because they were already up and running, and I needed to learn what their limitations were, what was hindering them from moving forward. And one of the things that came up with was that the consistency is in supervision or access to an officer wasn't there. Now they had a supervisor that they reported to for some back end things like who does your time card and all that stuff. But on the day-to-day, they would talk to the patrol supervisor, which that rotates through every shift. There's a new supervisor every day. There could be a different officer in charge. So they didn't have a consistency and someone they could go to that had like back knowledge and or just knowledge of mental health issues and or of the people. So they would have to spend time on Supervisor A to Supervisor B, like, hey, yesterday Supervisor A said this person needs to do this. Supervisor B maybe doesn't want to toe that line or maybe wants to go a different way. So they lack that consistency. And that's where I went, how can I fill in that gap? And that's what I believe has made the difference. And for us to go to next levels is I'm out there. I know the people generally and or have a good understanding because we staff regularly what the clients that they have. So I will have an idea of who they're working with or who they're looking at. Hey, this person is starting to become dysregulated. They are going to need some help. I know ahead of time for if it does become a police officer necessary call. Our crisis responders don't have the ability to involuntarily take people to the hospital. We call it ITA, Involuntary Treatment Act. They don't have those credentials. The people that do would be, in our state, are DCR, designated crisis responder, doctors, and police officers. So on the functional day-to-day, police officers are often called to situations where people have either homicidal or suicidal thoughts or are gravely disabled, and the officer has to make an assessment. Now, am I going to involuntarily take this person to the next level of care, be it the hospital, or are they going to remain here on the street or at their home? Another thing we didn't talk about, there were some changes in our laws over the 21 to 23, where legislature made it clear they do not want officers using force on people that have not committed a crime. And I think we can all agree on that. Like, that's not what we want to do. The unfortunate byproduct of that was that when it came time to involuntarily treat people, like someone who was gravely disabled or they are suicidal, danger to themselves or others, we were not allowed to use force to take them to the next level of care. Now, I'm not saying we need to beat people up, or we're beating people up, like, let me beat you up to get you care. But sometimes we have to put our hands on people because they don't want to go, they want to kill themselves. And sometimes we have to physically intervene and put handcuffs on them to take them to the next level of care so they don't kill themselves or others. That was taken off of our ability to do. The legislator made it clear, don't intervene with that. So that got corrected. The legislator, after a couple of years, saw the error in the way and made some changes. So now that can happen. But it has left kind of a residual effect with some officers, some people in our profession, of you're really going to take an extra time to think about what are the possible things that could happen in this interaction should I need to use force on somebody who has not committed a crime.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. When you talk about like the governmental interests, it creates a pause, as we've learned from experience, to go, so this person is a danger to themselves. What's the potential that they're a danger to others? And what's the potential fallout to them hurting themselves or others? And what's the likelihood that they'll hurt others? And so we use a term like time, distance, and cover. And so if we take a pause and consider this individual, let's just say, who's alone in their home, who's called in to say they're suicidal, and we know they're all by themselves with no plans or and no belief that they're going to leave their home, it gives the police officer pause to go, because in the old days we would have rushed to their house to help them.
Yeah.
And I'm not being critical of that, but we are wise to learn from experience and go, okay, let's take a minute to consider the governmental interest in this individual who's only a threat to themselves. And we want to help them if we can. But we also have to consider what could happen if we go and how that could escalate. And so there's a benefit to taking a second and a tactical pause to consider tactics. And so now compare that to an individual who's calling in, he's sitting on a park bench downtown in a congested area, or people are calling about an individual who's threatening suicide, who's out in the public. We have to handle that a little bit differently. And so it's just, over the decades, we've learned from bad situations, or where things didn't go well. And so continue.
Yeah, I bring that type of situation up just to show how beneficial it has been to have people that are in the mental health field help me do my job.
Yeah.
But the symbiotic relationship, whereas I get to help them do their job in the same facet. So some of the folks that work for us have worked in organizations where the cops brought the person handcuffed, shackled, and dropped him off there and said, here you go, fix him. And now they get to see, oh, wait, there is some things on the back end, on the police side, on the street side, that happened that they weren't quite aware of had happened. So it is a great relationship, because then I get the benefit of be front loaded with knowledge, or have a greater amount of knowledge with my behavioral health person to say, hey, here are all the gaps that you may not be aware of with either this person's condition or people that experience this condition. It helps have me be more articulate in my response. My position also affords me a greater amount of time, because I'm not responding to calls for service on the radio. Whereas before, there's always a competition. When you have a patrol officer or supervisor, they're always listening to the radio and have to anticipate the next call for service that may come out. Maybe something critical. It may be, as a supervisor, you have 4 or 5 other folks that are working for you. You need to pay attention to all the calls they're on, plus whatever a behavioral health person is presenting you, which is not a crime, which, as you're prioritizing, is probably going to go to the bottom. So all that has afforded me more time to do my job, which has saved lives. For instance, I responded with one of the state DCRs, not one of our folks, a mental health person in the community that called up for assistance. They needed to go talk to a person that was known to be a severe alcoholic, and apparently they were having an episode. It was someone I did not know, the DCR nor the person the house we were going to. I get there and I speak with the DCR. We brief about why we're there. It seems like a kind of a bread and butter call for a patrol person, where a patrol person probably would have heard, if I was on patrol, if I would have heard what was facing me, I probably would have went, why am I here? I got to go. There's crimes happening. I was afforded the opportunity, because I had time on my schedule, go in with them, spent probably the better part of 45 minutes or an hour in this person's home, gathering information from a loved one and interacting with the person who I thought at the time was kind of playing possum and not reacting normally, just saying, okay, this person is intoxicated and they just don't want the cops there. They don't want to talk to the DCR. Tried each of us trying to interact, just wasn't working. It was in that extra time, because I remember there was a point where I was like, I'm leaving. This is nothing. I'm leaving. But I thought, I have time to spend. Let's spend the time. Ended up trying to get the person, telling me, you got to go with me. We're on the path now of involuntary. You're not going to be able to make the choice because of what was presented to me. And person, again, we go to try to get them to go, and they're just limp and not going to go with the program. I'm like, okay, I'll order up an ambulance. I get an ambulance, shows up, ambulance crew gets there, they're doing their thing, and all of a sudden there's a flurry of activity, and we got to go now. I'm like, oh, okay, let's get going. The person's blood sugar, I think, was in the 20s, which is critically low. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm glad, let's get them going. We get to the hospital, and I do my paperwork at the hospital. This is why we're here. Off I go. I end up back at the hospital later, and the nurses staff are like, hey, you're the one that brought in so-and-so. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what? Now what? It's always good when someone's like, are you the one who brought so-and-so in? But they say, you saved her life. Like, it wasn't just me. It was everybody in the process. But when they got to the hospital, the blood sugar was in the teens. And if we would have just written it off and went, you're drunk, sleep it off, probably would have went into a coma. And if the loved one wasn't there, we could what if this forever. But that could not have continued for another 12 hours.
Yeah. And your ability to handle that call with what gave you the time was you're specifically assigned to the behavioral health unit. You're not a slave to the radio. You're not responding to calls for service like a patrol officer. And by no fault of their own, the patrol officer is having to triage emergencies and calls for service quickly so they can be available for the next call for service. And so not always time to dedicate to that. But in your unique position with the behavioral health unit, you're able to, your schedule is more free. Yeah. That's your whole job.
It's my whole job every day.
Yeah. And so in the last stretch of time we have here, you now have 5 crisis responders working with you on a schedule of, they work Monday through Friday, correct?
Yes.
And you have the community outreach or the community outreach coordinator and yourself. What then, you now work at our satellite station, and outside of the main station, you work down at our satellite station. You have your whole staff there some days of the week. Just give us a picture of what your average day looks like, or what their average day looks like.
So I start my day with the community outreach coordinator, and we go out and beat the brush to find where people might be either illegal camping or trespassing, to educate them and to encourage them, and then to enforce the law when it comes to it.
Pre-dawn every morning.
Mm-hmm. Every work morning.
Right.
Then that takes us probably a few hours, depending on the day. We come across people in various states of where they're at in life. If we come across somebody that we feel like we can help with the problem, then we start problem solving. And that could mean getting them to the next best service, or connect with a behavioral health unit person to get them to them. offloaded for some intense short-term case management to the next best location. That has proved to be very successful. We've had many over the, 9-10 months now, many interactions that have had some great impacts. One time we came across a guy that was camping in our park. He had a tent fully set up in a city park in the center of town, which is completely forbidden. Camping is always illegal in our parks, and this is something that I hadn't seen for years. A full-on tent set up in a city park. It happened to be the city manager that brought it to light to me early in the morning. So I get a message early to my terminal that there's a tent set up, and I had like straight there from I have a route that I do, and I broke the route. I'm going straight. What is going on? Why is there a tent set up? And I'm getting my computer fired up. Like there's handcuffs getting put on somebody, and a ticket's getting written. Like someone's going to jail today. Who has the audacity at this point? Because I feel like I've educated everybody that I've come across. Mm-hmm. And so I get there and knock on the tent, shake the tent, nothing. I hear a guy mumbling inside, rustling around. Like, this guy's not even talking to me. I'm like, hello, police department. And I feel like I'm yelling and nothing. I'm shaking the tent violently. All of a sudden I hear, who's that? What's happening? And I'm like, it's the police. And I get nothing back. And the tent opens up. A face pops out that I haven't seen before. And it became readily apparent that this person is very hard of hearing due to the level of conversation they're having back at me and what they're not picking up. I could see they're trying to read my lips as I'm talking to them. Like, oh my gosh, who are you and how did you get here? So we go to the old pen and paper, and I find out that he had just become homeless the day or two prior. An organization gave him a tent and pointed him in a westerly direction and said, go camp over there. And I don't know if he got the full information, because I can't imagine someone said to go camp where he was camping, but he went west and there he was camping. At the time, outreach coordinator is now catching up to me on this loop, and I'm like, hey, here's this guy. We need a problem solved here. So outreach coordinator calls up somebody. Hey, we got this person camping. And by the time I was leaving, after they had the camp set up, we were driving them off a couple blocks to the next resource center. Off they were, housed and back living to their life the best they could. Took a couple hours.
So that really illustrates like how far we've come since, say, let's just say the last 10 years, because while politics are politics and not everyone doesn't agree on everything, the city really does feel like it's working towards a common goal now, both sides of the aisle. Everybody kind of agrees we have to do something, and the model we're using seems to speak to all audiences. The audience demanding compassion, which is appropriate, the audience demanding enforcement, which is appropriate, and the audience demanding education and resources. Like, all of those can't work in a silo. They have to work together. And so over the last decade, we've learned how to piece those all together. We have the support of local government and the resources available and the support of the community to problem solve in this multifaceted way. And we've really come a long way with the learning lessons and with the support of local government and of course the chief in our department, like everybody coming together to go, we're going to solve this problem with boots on the ground. And again, not everybody agrees on every element of it, but we all seem to be working towards a common goal, and so that's super helpful. So that's your morning, and that's the community outreach coordinator. What's a day look like for a crisis responder? Because the jobs are different. They merge and they cross paths, as you mentioned, but morning starts. What's the day look like for a crisis responder?
Yeah, through the rest of the day, we are either responding to calls for service that look appropriate for a crisis responder. That could be checking the welfare on somebody, It could be something that comes in as a disorderly conduct crime, and either we have an idea who the person is, or patrol gets there and say it's this person and they're having a mental health crisis, not intending to commit a criminal act. There could be a trespass that occurs. And so we're all watching for those calls for service. And also our crisis responders are proactively going out and checking up on people that, like I mentioned before, they do short-term intense case management. So short-term is the shortest term possible, that they will get a hold of somebody, try to triage with them what it is they need to be successful, and finding the right avenue to drop them off with that will make them successful. We're kind of like an airport, if you will. So an airport, nobody's destination is really the airport. We go to the airport to get to our destination and then go from there. So we are just but an airport terminal. You're here for a short time to wait until your flight gets to where you need to go. So that's what that looks like during our day. I will go either with our crisis responders because it's something where there is a safety issue that needs to be mitigated, which brings me in the enforcement prong, or they need my authority to exercise maybe an involuntary action with somebody. And then the rest of their days are spent writing reports of what their interactions were, just like in police work.
So their job's a lot like police officers in that they are on the police radio. They're in plain clothes with credentials, but our model, because there's a lot of different models, our folks are in plain clothes so that they're the most approachable possible to the population they serve. They're driving a car that is marked with very minimal police markings, but it's very obvious that it's a behavioral health unit. They are using our computer-aided dispatch programs. They are monitoring the call board. They are self-dispatching and dispatched by dispatch. So it's a lot like a patrol officer,
right?
In that and again, there's other models across the country, but our model is they are very proactive. They wear boots. They are out on the street every day, handling calls, proactively contacting people, so that if I talk to Bob this morning, there's a chance that this intervention with Bob, who had a hard day yesterday, and I was able to find him in an alley this morning, if I can get my hands on him this morning and help him, I may avoid police calls for service later in the day, right? So my early intervention with Bob, it could reduce calls for service down the road and help him get the need met before he even knows he has it.
Right. You mentioned the different models that are out there for crisis responders. I like our model, which has been intentional because it leads to more agility for the crisis responder and the patrol officer. Another model is the crisis responder riding in the police car with the cop to all the calls that they go to. Yeah, and that works great, especially if you got to travel long distances. A part that I don't like about that is that one or the other ends up being tied up on one or the other's type of call. So the cop goes to a
2 hours processing a DUI.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah, you pick up a drunk driver.
Yeah.
And you have a crisis responder with you who could be going to crisis responder cars.
Yeah.
And vice versa, you have a cop tied up because their crisis responder calls, they take time. Like I mentioned, the one that I detailed where I have afforded the time. They could be with somebody for hours trying to get them to the appointment that they need. Or one of our crisis responders was on a phone call for 5 hours trying to navigate Social Security for somebody. Now, I imagine my administration would not be happy if one of their cops was tied up for 5 hours because the crisis responder was on a phone call or tied up with a client for that long.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense for us. There is a concern of safety aspects as well. Obviously, there should be. Our crisis responders are unarmed civilians. We are intentional about their branding and their look. They have soft clothes just like anybody else would out there on the street. So that way they don't look like the police official. Oftentimes when you have the crisis responder located directly with the police officer, most of the models I've seen is they're wearing almost everything the same as the police officer, but the gun belt.
Yeah.
And I'm just not so sure that a person in crisis who looks at a person wearing all dark clothes with patches on their sides and a ballistic vest if they're going to like look and see if they have a gun or not to determine if they are the crisis responder or the cop when they just showed up in a cop car.
Yeah, right.
And so we are intentional about not creating that barrier. But with that, we also have to be concerned about safety, that my crisis responders have to keep in mind and triage safety aspects. And that's where I come in. If there's any component that there could be a safety aspect, cop has to be there leading the charge on that until risk can be mitigated. So that's why I like our model better. It works for us. Maybe it's just because we're a medium-sized city and it works well, but it's one that I advocate for.
So I guess I'll end with this. Just my 2 cents on what I think makes our program successful is that we have first responders in our crisis responders are true first responders who wear boots and work in the trenches, as opposed to models where you're waiting for the individuals who need service to come to you, or you forcing people to make appointments and come to buildings and do things that is contrary to their daily life. We meet people where they are on the street. And I use the boots as it's sort of a metaphor. On day one, when we first brought the contractors on, who are some of the same individuals, they showed up in, shoes, lady shoes. They happen to be ladies. And they're in my office, they're in the captain's office, and I'm giving them their briefing. And I said, y'all are going to need boots. And, they're like, oh, well, we'll see. And some of them had done crisis response work before, but I just knew from what I knew about responding to calls in our town and what we envisioned for this model, boots was, again, I'll say it's a little bit of a metaphor, but they were also literally going to need boots because some places are gross. And so at the end of day one, our team comes in and they said about these boots. And they spent the morning the next day going to a police supplier and getting some boots. And so I use that as a metaphor to say our program works because we have true first responders in the trenches, meeting people where they are, solving problems before they happen. Your, I guess, final thoughts on why our program works and where you think it's going.
I think I've discussed just about all the reasons why it works. The agility and the ability to have time and direction and latitude to get things done. We are collectively problem solvers, and that's what we approach every day is problem solving. The plan for the future is one to grow a little bit more and add another cop to the mix, because I can only be there so much, and I have supervisory duties that come up as well. But what I see is the next level would be to have another police officer attached to the unit that can help divide and conquer things that I can't make it to. Just continuing doing what we're doing, but at a greater scale.
Awesome. Well, we gave this presentation in a community forum once at a city council meeting. I thought it was a great success. It really painted a picture of success through lessons learned over a 10-year process, as both of us have evolved through different positions of patrol officer, corporal, detective, patrol supervisors, commanders and sergeants, and just we've served at every level along the way. Mm-hmm. And our department, with the support of the chief, who's the behavioral health unit was his brainchild, has really tackled this problem proactively. And the result is we've created a service for the community based on their demand. We're serving the individuals in need and in crisis better with the model, and I think we're meeting the needs of the community better than we ever have. And I think, without patting ourselves on the back too much, our collective success is an example that other agencies, other communities could follow.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, I'm MCNEW, and this is Duty, Grit, and Grinds. Thanks for watching.